April 17th, end of our week that we've been reading on religion. And as I put in the syllabus, it was religion and ideology. But you'll see clearly from our readings this week, you've seen, and from this lecture, you'll hear the connection between religion, ideology, class, and then also a word like legitimation. And I'll be talking about that today. So this lecture brings all that together, begins to introduce us to our next week of readings. We're getting very close to the end of the course. This week we actually slowed a little bit on the assignments, which I hope was helpful for you. I think that was some of my idea as I was designing the syllabus for this class, was that by the end, not to have this kind of big push of work, but to try and be pretty constant throughout, maybe slow down just a tad at the end, and then have our final exam. I'll be giving some details about that to you probably next week, actually, because we're coming up on it. Reminding you of the time, start giving you a review sheet, and then also suggesting when I might have a review lecture for you guys before that exam. So for today, I'm going to be talking about religion and class, and then going back into some early theory from Karl Marx about religion and ideology, and then bringing together some of our readings this week and looking forward to next week. So when we think about religion and class, we could actually look at religion and class in two ways. One, or before we do that, one thing to recall is that class is one of the original ways within the discipline of sociology to think about society. So if you've taken any other sociology class, or actually if you're just kind of informed in general, you'll know that Karl Marx is one of the great founding thinkers of sociology. And he really introduced the concept of class, and his theory really developed how class is a huge element of everything in society. And of course, others have had things to say about class, particularly Max Weber or Pierre Bourdieu in recent years as sociological theorists, but Karl Marx kind of gets the ball rolling. That being said, before we leap into Marx, there are really kind of two ways to think about religion and class. One way is to think about class as what we might call a kind of individual characteristic that is expressed through conglomerations. In other words, individual characteristics that kind of come together as a social class or group. There was a strand of this research in the early 20th century, mid-20th century with the religion and class that's coming back actually now in the 21st century. And it goes something like this. It would take a look at the particular characteristics of individuals in certain religious groups and try and get a sense of what is the social class ordering of religious groups. So for example, kind of a constant finding, especially up into the 1950s, would be to kind of take a survey and say, okay, I'm going to divide out the Episcopalians, the Lutherans, the Baptists, the Pentecostals, the Catholics, the Mormons, the Jews, the Muslims, and I'm going to see what are the social characteristics of those groups, and then I'm going to order the groups. So we got kind of a classic ordering that went something like this. Episcopalians, Episcopalians? Did I spell that right? Episcopalians. Yeah, Episcopalians. Sorry about that. We're always basically on the top of that scale in terms of having the highest education level, the most prestigious occupations, linkage into the most elite organizations. Episcopalians were always coming out on the top of the scale. And Episcopalians historically were kind of rooted in New England, in the Northeast, and in the kind of old familial and social class institutions that perpetuated class. So Episcopalians, kind of near the top. Presbyterians and Lutherans were always kind of near there. And so let's say this snapshot is 1950. Methodists maybe were somewhere around. And then we saw that Jews usually were somewhere in this order, maybe around here. Catholics were quite low, even in 1950. And then we'd have groups like Baptists kind of at the bottom. And Mormons actually at that point were somewhere kind of closer to the bottom. This is like 1950, right? Well, in this strand of researching things, people look back now and they say, oh, well, what's changed? Well, there's a couple things that have changed. Mormons have definitely kind of climbed up the ladder in terms of their educational and occupational status. Catholics have climbed up the ladder, kind of equal to everybody else at this point. Episcopalians kind of still hover out there near the top, but the jump between middle and top isn't quite so big anymore. And now at the bottom we kind of had these newer religious groups since the 1950s, in particular Pentecostals, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses kind of inhabiting the bottom. And again, this is in terms of kind of looking at individuals, seeing in surveys and that sort of thing what their social and economic status is, and then saying, well, they're part of these groups, so let's rank the groups. A second way to think about religion and class is to see class in terms of institutional bases that are reproduced over time. So it's relationships of class in society, relationships that are based in education, occupation, government, capital relationships. But by asking the question of how are these sorts of relationships reproduced? In other words, what are the ideological foundations that allow for the reproduction of class conditions across time in a given society? And this, in some ways, is kind of the more kind of classic Marxist approach. In his writings, and then through a lot of neo-Marxists throughout the last 100 years. And so this takes us then directly to Marx. So let me say a few things about Marx, particularly how Marx connects to religion. Everybody thinks they know how Marx connects to religion, right? They say, oh, it's the opium of the people thing. But the reality of how Marx connects to religion is a little bit more problematic, if you will, or a little bit more complex than that. So some background on Marx. Marx basically kind of spent his life being an on-the-run intellectual. He was kicked out of a whole bunch of countries, ended up living the majority of his adult life in Britain, impoverished, hungry, and actually had a child die of hunger. Marx's familial background in terms of religion was Judaism. But Marx became separated from the practice of Judaism at an early age. His father actually had converted, and Marx experienced religion, in particular Judaism, as kind of a highly charged social stigma at that time in Germany. Now this is, 1820s in Germany, 1830s. There's a great amount of anti-Semitism already, and Jews were often kind of set apart socially, economically, physically, and religiously as kind of a group that was looked down upon. And religion in general was highly charged as kind of a carrier of political identity too. Germany was not a coherent country yet at this point. It was a bunch of provinces that had originally been kind of royal fiefdoms, and these political divisions were closely connected with religious divisions. So as he saw it, religion was definitely kind of a source of